Excuse me, Mayor Martin. The live stream is running and ready for when you are ready to start the meeting.
Excellent, thank you. It's 6:29, so I'm just going to give it one more minute. I'm just looking for Councillor Jansen and Councillor Day to return, and then I'll start. Okay, it is 6:30. I'm sure Councillor Jansen, oh, there he is. I guess he waits until 6:30 before he logs on.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
No, that's perfect, Councillor Jansen. Thank you. You weren't late at all. I was just about to start the meeting. So I'm going to call to order the meeting for Monday, May 10th, regular council meeting at 6:30 p.m. And I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. I am going to do a roll call. So if all of you could unmute, please, and I will just go on my screen. Councillor Baxter?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
I'm here.
Councillor Logan?
I'm here.
Councillor Kobayashi?
Here.
And Councillor Jansen's hand. Go ahead.
Playing with some settings. Playing with some settings, sorry.
That's all right. So Councillor Jansen is present. Which moves me on to the approval of the agenda. Councillor Logan, did you want to make a suggestion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I wonder if we should move item 8.1 to the end of the bylaw section, considering it's going to generate a fair amount of discussion, I suspect.
Okay. I will take that advice and move 8.1 and make it the new 8.6, and unless there's objections to that by council. I'm not seeing anybody raising their hands to that idea. So I'm looking, so the motion before us is to accept the near-term, long-term, and regular council meeting agenda with that change. I'm not hearing any objections. Oh, I do. I am. Okay, Councillor Parkinson, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a few little things. Under the long-term agenda, item 2, review the transportation master plan and recommend a 10-year capital sidewalk plan. That's listed as complete. I think essentially we picked some low-hanging fruit on the list of projects to get started on and asked staff to get started on them. We don't have the budget set up to do this properly, at least certainly not in year 2. And we have just selected a few of the projects to get started on. We haven't got a full 10-year plan. So I wouldn't consider that complete. I don't think it's a panic to move it forward in the short term, but I wouldn't say it was complete.
Sorry, Councillor Parkinson, I'm going to stop you there. So can staff please comment? Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff can amend the long-term agenda to indicate this item is near complete.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
Yeah, I just wanted to also throw in my support. This is the first time I think I've seen creating the Royal Roads Forest Plan. I think that's hugely important for our community. And then the other thing here, if I may, I don't mean to hog the time here, but on the April 26 minutes where I had to leave the meeting for a bit, it recognizes I returned the meeting at 8:19, but below that is a motion relating to the height variance of the Pelican Drive project, which I don't think I was in there for. So I think there's some timing issues there that might be out of whack. I don't think I was present. I shouldn't have been present. If I was gone, I should have been gone for the whole thing, and I think I was. So
sorry, are you speaking to the minutes?
Yes,
Councillor
I am.
Parkinson? Okay, we haven't got there yet.
My apologies.
We're just on the agenda. Are there any other comments in regards to the near-term, long-term, or regular council meeting agenda items? Seeing none, I'm going to assume I'm going to say that motion has passed unanimously. And I'm going to move on to public participation next before I get to adoption of minutes and so on. So public participation, we do have one written submission, which was attached to the agenda, and that is related to 8.1, which was the tax rate bylaw, which is the new 8 I believe I said 5 or 6. And then one person has registered to speak at public participation this evening. So I will read this comment. Comments pertaining to matters that have been the subject of a public hearing are prohibited where the bylaws related to the matter has not been presented to council for consideration of adoption. Excuse me. The following items have been subject to a public hearing and cannot be spoken about tonight, which is bylaw number 1840, retail cannabis, 310 Goldstream Road, and bylaw number 1700-04, Royal Beach Sub-Area Plan, and bylaw number 1837, CD30, Zone Royal Beach. So saying that, I will look to staff to introduce the member of the public.
Hi there, Mr. Stinson, if you can address council.
Hi, my name is Paul Stinson, and I'm located at 305 Perimeter Place. So members of Colwood Council, tonight I wish to talk to you regarding two main topics. First, we wish to raise our objection to the planned property tax increase for 2021 as per agenda item 8.1, which we've now moved to 8.6. In addition to speaking tonight, we also wrote in, and which we sincerely hope that council, staff, and mayor have read and taken the time to conduct their own due diligence with respect to all associated documents and submissions, especially given the continued impact the residents of Colwood, as well as those around the world, due to COVID-19 pandemic. Quite simply put, now is not the time to see a 9.3% increase in the gross municipal taxes on residential properties that the City of Colwood have put forward on tonight's agenda and as per their attached documentation. Recently, within the last week or so, Statistics Canada released their job figures for April 2021. A loss of over 200,000 jobs, and that's just for the month of April, in Canada, given the continued elongation and spikes related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It will be a while until things get back to normal. Residents were informed through recent news articles, the Times Colonist, the Gazette, and online sources, in which the mayor was quoted and identified that the increase was going to be less than 7%. So we are all very surprised, frustrated, and asking for answers when, or as per the attached agenda materials, that proposed increase from the city, i.e. the sections of the tax increase that specifically are controlled by this committee, meaning the municipal gross taxes are now stated as 9.3. Where and how did this discrepancy come to be? And why would an elected official think that such a high increase would be acceptable to residents given the current COVID situation? Today in social media, this has been playing out as a hot topic, and many residents were unaware and unsatisfied with this budget. We know that the City of Colwood held the line on last year's property taxes, and for that we are grateful to the entire Colwood Council. Likewise to last year, this year, there are many items within the recent budget that should be considered for delay into the future or should be lowered in priority given the current conditions impacting the residents of Colwood. Generally, it appears that the overall increases seem to indicate staff, most of council, and the mayor are out of touch with the residents of Colwood. Don't get me wrong, we do understand and know that after a zero increase year, there will need to be some form of increase this year. However, planning to, in essence, take what was done last year and then add to what looks like a new big spending for a wish list of increased staffing, etc., while many residents' work have been dramatically affected, seems out of place. Other municipalities have taken steps to minimize things this year and come with lower increase as they align with what is impacting their residents. As example, a 2.2% increase from Chosen, a 3% increase for Highlands, a 4.5% increase for View Royal, instead of their original 7.3%. We strongly urge Council to quickly address this, given your May 15th, 2021 legal requirement, and reconsider the budget with an eye to what can be delayed or what is not absolutely necessary in the current climate, so that there is a more realistic impact on the residents of Colwood. In summary, we again say, now is not the time to see a 9.3% increase in the gross municipal taxes on properties that the City of Colwood have put forward on tonight's agenda. I would also like to read now an email submitted to those in Council by my neighbor, Roger Conrad of 305 Perimeter Place, and which was provided an email submission to Colwood, and who was told this material would be added to the public consultation correspondence this evening. And it was confirmed by staff it would be done, yet it is not there in your package as of 6 p.m. tonight. His note reads, Dear Mayor and Council, during this world pandemic, with so many people out of work or on a reduced work week, more pressure is being placed on the family unit. I am asking Council to reconsider the 9.4% gross tax increase. I believe the necessity for this increase can be put off for another year to allow working families the time they need to put some money back into their savings account. Something as a result of COVID-19 that has been completely wiped out many. Many young families in our community are having hard enough time to make ends meet without added expenses. Truthfully, I feel to pass this tax increase at this time would be fiscally irresponsible and morally the wrong thing to do. For your consideration, thank you. Cheers, Roger Conrad. As a second item I would like to raise, it is to express a concern related to the interpretation over the following statement that governs all of the Colwood meetings for the public. Quote, members of the public will be provided an opportunity to present concerns or ask questions to Council. Comments pertaining to a matter that has been subject of a public hearing are prohibited where the bylaws related to the matter have not been presented to Council for consideration of adoption. The public and possibly legal interpretation of that statement is that between the point following a public hearing being completed until the matter has been presented to Council for consideration of adoption, that we, the public, cannot speak or write into Council in any of its regard. Is that correct? As that is what it reads. Also, then it would seem that when an item is raised on an official agenda, supported by presentations and documentation, that it would be thereby considered presented for their consideration. Thus, why would staff identify to the public that we cannot speak to an item, as is the case on this evening's agenda, and as was expressed to me and others? We have instead been advised by staff that, quote, we are not permitted to speak on a matter that has been subject of a public hearing until after the bylaw has been presented to Council for denial, adoption, or to be abandoned. Please note the difference in the key wording change interpreted by staff versus what is publicized to the residents and the general public body. One says, where not presented to staff for consideration, and the other says, until after the bylaw has been presented for denial, adoption, or abandon. So which way is it? And request that the language in all respects be clarified and made consistent to the residents, the general public, and all of your supporting documentation. If in fact our interpretation is accurate, that is, until it finds itself on the agenda with supporting presentation, then we respectfully ask that the agenda items 8.2 and 8.3 be deferred, as many in the public wanted to comment and were only silenced by the City of Colwood. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your call. I'm going to look to staff to comment in regards to why we cannot hear new information after a public hearing. Mr. Earl, or whoever you wish to sort of educate the general public on that.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just looking to see who from the planning team is on, but I will answer to the best of my abilities and ask that one of the planners jump in for greater clarification. I believe it comes from the common law principle that those who attend a public hearing have the right to all of the information that the decision makers are party to, and such that once the public hearing is closed, the decision makers are not allowed to receive new information because that would not provide fairness to those who are at the public hearing. So I believe it's in common law and not regulation, but happy to stand corrected if one of the planners wants to jump in.
Through the mayorship, two members of council, I'm not going to speak to the actual aspect of law. I leave that to Mr. Earls to be able to define it. However, the reason why the public hearing is typically the last time for information to be presented is so that staff can work with the information that's provided, provide clarity. Council's got the option to rescind or consider that point in time. And that after the public hearing, there is not supposed to be new information tabled for either council or for the public. The results of the information presented are supposed to be that which is carried forward as either resolved or not. So it's typically the last point in time. However, to be able to open up to public comment through the comment session, perhaps one of corporate services can speak to the pattern about that. This is just public comment. I think about anything. Thank you very much. My comments about new information.
Great. Thank you. I see Mr. Baxter, or excuse me, Councillor Baxter's hands up. Councillor Baxter, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just thank the gentleman for pointing that out. And indeed, the words at the beginning of our agenda don't make the point precisely enough. It is not until these things are presented for consideration, but as staff apparently told the gentleman, nobody can speak at council about this matter until it has been decided.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to move on. We don't have anyone else. I'll just confirm with staff, we have no other public participation this evening.
That is correct, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to adoption of minutes and receipt. I will go to Councillor Parkinson in a moment because he did want to have a correction about where he arrived back into the office, or excuse me, back into the committee meeting. But I'd also like to point out, Councillor Day was able to point out to staff earlier this evening that under 5.2, please note that there was a minor change to resolution R2021-123, and the resolution will read that an off-cycle 2021 grant in aid of 2200 be granted to the Arts and Culture Colwood Society. There was a comment, or there was a phrase in there that said 2200 or less, so we did remove the or less. So Councillor Parkinson, we will go to you first, and then I see Councillor Day and Baxter. Councillor Parkinson, in regards to the minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It's just, I guess I left the meeting at 7:58. It says I returned at 8:19. Could well be true, but below where it notes I returned, there's a motion that was moved by Councillor Day, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi, 2021-121, dealing with the Pelican Drive project, which I was trying to excuse myself for. And I'm pretty sure I did excuse myself for the whole discussion. So I think my return should be after that motion.
I think I don't see any objections, so I think we'll internally make that change officially.
Thank you,
thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that the same spot in the minutes, I believe that our 2021-121 actually came before the motion that was carried. So I just think that got muddled up a little bit because I made the motion, it didn't carry, and then the other motion was made. I believe that's how it went. So I just thought that might be helpful to what happened with Councillor Parkinson's return as well. I think it just got mixed up there.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
On page 7, resolution R2021-122, there are some words missing, and I did go back and listen to the watch the video and check that if I'm correct here, and I was. So after bicycles in that resolution, it's there are the words "even if only at one end," and that is how it was said in the meeting.
Okay.
Okay, and I also have resolutions 123 and 124 below that are reversed. They actually don't make any sense the way around they are, and I did check that on the video as well. And they 123 and 124 should be reversed.
Okay, I'm going to take that as guidance for staff, and I think staff can make those changes. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Your Worship, could you just repeat that correction to R 2021-123? That was the grant in aid. Could you just read exactly what the motion was now again?
Sure. The motion should read that an off-cycle 2021 grant in aid of $2,200 be granted to the Arts and Culture Colwood Society.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to remove everybody's hands. So we have heard those changes. I'm not hearing any comments from staff that those changes in the minutes are a problem. Sounds like I'm correct. So I am going to look for a, not hearing that there's any other objections to 5.1. I'm going to say that the motion is passed unanimously. And also moving on to 5.2, regular council meeting minutes with the changes that were discussed. Are there any other comments? Hearing none, I will say that that motion has been unanimously passed as well. We are now going to move on to 6, correspondence requiring direction. This is from the CRD regarding the municipal consent for bylaw number 4375, which is the liquid waste management core area, and Western Community Service Loan Authorization bylaw number 2, 2020.
Sorry, just
Yes?
a quick point of order. You missed your mayor's message. Did you have a message?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, I don't, but since you brought it up, Councillor Day, I will just make a quick comment that if people are interested, 8.4 in the CRD agenda on Wednesday is a motion to pass the feasibility study or ask the province to do a feasibility study for the West Shore Ferry. And so if people are interested, I encourage you to either write in, speak, or just listen into the CRD meeting on Wednesday. And that would be my only mayor's message. Thank you for catching that, Councillor Day. So I am going to move on to 6 now, which is that correspondence for 6.1. What is the will of council? There is a motion and a recommendation in our agenda. And if I'm not seeing any comments, I will just go to that recommendation and ask, are there any, oh, sorry, I do have a, Councillor Logan.
I was just going to move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. I was good. Okay, great. Thanks. Do I have a seconder to that? I will second it, Mayor Martin, to just move it along. Clear hands.
Excuse me, Mayor Martin, it's Marcy speaking.
Certainly.
The motion was to either consent or not consent.
Thank you. So, Councillor Logan, were you consenting? I was assuming that you meant consent.
Yes, you were. Okay.
Thank you. So it's the consent, not the not consent. Any discussion? Councillor Parkinson, Day, then Kobayashi. Councillor Parkinson.
I won't pretend that I've absorbed the whole thing here, but my sense of this bylaw is that we're just all now part of the club with the rest of the CRD Seward areas and share costs accordingly, which may be detrimental to us with some of their older systems downtown until it's time for a new treatment plant out here, and it's probably the way of the world. So I think that's all there is here, and it's just a housekeeping thing to borrow some money to keep the projects rolling along. So barring anybody correcting me on that, I'm happy with this.
Great, thank you. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I just note that the costs have gone up considerably since I was the alternate at the CRD and following this closely. In fact, by quite a few millions. So is there any discretion here? My sense of it is that in for a penny, in for a pound, but we are presented this opportunity to say something, and I do think that it's important that we note that the costs that are associated with the sewage treatment plant are very high and higher than we ever anticipated they would be.
Councillor Day, would you like to get staff comment on that? Is that what
Sure.
you're looking for?
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if does anyone in staff have a comment in regards to Councillor Day's?
Thank you very much. Through the worship to Councillor Day, I believe members of the CRD are in our audience tonight and are able to speak to this for you. If corporate services would just welcome them, I'll leave the floor to them. Thank you.
Mr. Robbins, I see you there, so I will give you the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Martin, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, just with regards to Councillor Day's question there, this bylaw is really to address the funding for the ongoing improvements, primarily to the conveyance works that have largely been deferred for 10 plus years while the decision around the treatment and the scope associated with the treatment program has been resolved. And then obviously with the construction complete, now we're embarking on the conveyance system upgrades, like I say, that have been largely deferred for over 10 years. So to Councillor Day's comment, yeah, certainly there was a budget associated with the core area wastewater treatment program. And in fact, there's going to be a completion report presented at a special board meeting, CRD board meeting later this month that will report out on the total project costs associated with core area wastewater treatment program itself. With regards to this work, this is really work that has been deferred. As I mentioned, we have been working up a 30-year capital program over the last couple of years. And in fact, we've been reporting out on that to the committee and board to continue to remind the committee and CRD board that there will be ongoing work associated with conveyance system, which is in need of continual improvement and renewal. And that's essentially the scope of this work here. So we put together a 30-year, $116 million capital program associated with that work. And this is really the first 5-year program of that 30-year program, which is over and above the wastewater treatment program itself.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Day?
Just so this is largely for the conveyance of the sewage solids.
That through you, Mayor, that's correct, Councillor Day. This work that we've outlined associated with this bylaw is to deal with conveyance system improvements, renewing infrastructure at the end of its service life, but over the course of the 30-year capital program, to also undertake work to add capacity to the conveyance system in order to convey all of the flows to utilize the full capacity of the wastewater treatment program.
Okay, so this is not just the residual solids augured line, this is more than that.
That's right. No, none of this work is associated with the residual solids line.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a quick question to staff on this. I didn't see it anywhere there, but what is our portion of this loan? Do you have what's the dollar value of it?
Through you, Mayor, The Colwood portion is calculated based on the capital funding formula that was set out in the bylaw approved last year. So I don't have the specific number, but of course, all the participants share in the cost of financing this work based on the treatment capacity allocations and the formula that was set out in the bylaw approved last year. So with this loan and the loan authorization, Colwood staff could refer to the bylaw in terms of the actual cost calculation based on the treatment capacity that was allocated to Colwood. So I don't have the specific numbers this evening.
Okay, is it something staff can get for us, Your Worship?
Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Your Worship. We can return at the following meeting with Colwood's percentage.
Great. Thank you. So that, Councillor Kobayashi, is that enough, or are you looking for something else?
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. Not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition to the motion? Councillor Day opposes. That motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Robbins, for coming this evening. Moving on to new business, 7.1. This is Rachel Buskey regarding the Economic Recovery Program Coordinator, Colwood Economic Recovery Plan Q2.
Hello. Thanks so much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about the COVID-19 pharmacy vaccination clinics, as well as the age-based vaccination clinics being run by the province. For example, the one at West Shore Communities at Eagle Ridge Community Centre in Langford. The province implemented a pharmacy-based vaccination program so that people can also receive their COVID-19 vaccine through selected local pharmacies. On the 10th of April, both the People's Pharmacy and Rexall and Colwood were given vaccine doses for 15 to 65-year-olds. The People's Pharmacy reached out to city staff to ask for help advertising their vaccination clinic to the community and help in setting up an Eventbrite page to enable back-to-back vaccine bookings so that all the doses of vaccine would be used. The Eventbrite page for COVID vaccinations has been very well received, with almost 100% bookings in the first few hours for each new batch of vaccine delivery to the mainland, from the mainland rather. People's Pharmacy have again received vaccine this week, and by the end of this week, the People's Pharmacy will have immunised approximately 1,100 people in Colwood. Rexall has also been vaccinating people in Colwood. The AstraZeneca vaccination can now be given to anyone 30 years or older. This program has made it possible for people in the community in younger age groups than those currently being serviced through the VHAR age-based program to receive their first dose vaccination. Several staff members have been able to take advantage of this opportunity to gain access to the vaccine. The city would like to continue supporting the province's vaccination rollout by supporting our local pharmacies with the necessary advertising and Eventbrite booking help to make vaccine doses more readily available to Colwoodians. Moving on to other initiatives in the Economic Recovery Programme, the city is in the project planning stages of the Business Retention, Expansion and Attraction Initiative and is looking to hold a kick-off meeting during the last 2 weeks of May. The project team aim to launch this new initiative to the business community during June, aiming to conduct interview discussions with business owners between June and September to identify key trends, challenges business faces, and ways in which the city could help. The dashboard metrics on recovery. The city is currently working on a suite of indicators to understand and quantify recovery in Colwood. In discussion with the South Island Prosperity Partnership, we are currently looking at opportunities to implement UN Sustainable Development Goals as the basis for reporting. The Neighbours Helping Neighbours initiative is currently being implemented, with communication services working on the branding for this project. Initial outreach to the community has been positively received, and we are currently looking for members of the community, for example, block watch captains and emergency services volunteers who might be interested in participating in this project and creating neighbourhood hubs. The city, with the consulting team Smart Risk Control, will begin wider community outreach during the last week of May and through June. The placemaking competition received 4 great entries which are being implemented through the community. There are 3 free plant and seed stands that have been set up in the community and have received very positive media attention. The Fit Happens Hop, Skip and Jump to its stenciled movement circles will have a Canada Day 1st of July launch date. The Colwood Garden Society are creating a native species and pollinator garden adjacent to the garden at City Hall. And we will see the installation of an Emily Carr interpretive panel during summer, close to where Emily may have painted the gravel pit along Painters Road Trail overlooking Royal Bay. The Sandwich Board initiative was relaunched during March 2021, and the city had an immediate uptake, with the business community reaching out to claim all 20 sandwich boards within the first 3 hours of them being offered to the community. You may have noticed their appearance of the Colwood branded sandwich boards throughout the community. Youth programming. The city has been working collaboratively with School District 62, attending their Healthy Schools, Healthy People community table. This is a collaborative group of organisations focused on enhanced community planning, connection and service coordination to better support children, youth and families. The city is providing information on Colwood's public resources for inclusion in an inventory of community gathering places. The city is also supporting a second initiative regarding the future creation of youth housing. And finally, the Royal Roads Scenario Mapping Project. The city has connected with Royal Roads University to discuss how we could work collaboratively on a scenario mapping type project. As we implement the BRE Business Retention, Expansion and Attraction Programme, it is likely that a suitable research project will become evident as we found opportunities to improve the city's economic intelligence and its ability to develop economic strategy and policy. Thank you so much for giving me the time to present this to you this evening, and this concludes my briefing.
Thank you. I will look to council for any questions, or there is a recommendation before us that staff proceed with a COVID-19 immunization clinics under stage 3 and 4 of the BC immunization plan. Councillor Kobayashi. Oh, unmute, Councillor Kobayashi.
Sorry, Paul Michael Baxter. I was just going to make the motion, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. Councillor Baxter, were you seconding that?
Unmuted, yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you, Rachel. Moving on to 7.2, this is Marley Bovin, who is our Manager of Finance. And this is in regards to our 2020 Annual Development Cost Charge Report. Ms. Bovin, this is, I think, the first time you presented to Council, so welcome, and we look forward to it.
Thank you very much. So yes, as the Mayor referred to, the Annual Development Cost Charges Report is something that must be reported annually. It's required under the Local Government Act. So the report tonight is attached. It's just a one-pager as Appendix 1 to the report. And the recommendation is that the 2020 Annual Development Cost Charges Report be received for information purposes only.
Great, thank you. I'm not going to look for a motion because we're going to receive it because it's in the agenda, but I will go to questions. Are there any questions in regards to this motion? Or excuse me, in regards to this report? Councillor Parkinson, then Kobayashi, and then Day.
Just curious what the $125,000 expense was for.
Sure, I can try to answer that through your worship to Councillor Parkinson. My understanding of that, and as the report signifies, is that we accepted a credit of the $125,728 for works that were completed under an excess roadworks agreement of a subdivision. And this was amount, I believe, to do with the Latoria and the VMP intersection. And so it was included in the revenue as well as in the expenditures. And I'm sure Mr. Molnar can provide more information if that wasn't a good enough description.
Well, I'm sure it was, but we'll go to Mr. Molnar anyways.
I'm unmuted just in case. That's exactly right. For the partnership agreement with Olympic View, we've got a cost proportionate based upon the DCCs that they would have spent and contributed towards the DCC program realized as part of the intersection works. So the staff estimated about 125,000 has been realized through those works in terms of the design, base working in and around the site as part of the roundabout projects as expenditure is carrying on. So that's approximately the value of work that has been received in 2020 towards that project. The developer's contribution to the project is around $500,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you, Your Worship. My first question's been answered. Second question, just for my own information, our SOFI report, when is that actually due every year?
Yeah, Your Worship, through to Councillor Kobayashi. The SOFI report is typically due by June 30th. Last year, there was an extension due to COVID, so that will be coming forward in June for council.
Thank you.
Great. And then Councillor Day.
Thank you. I was just curious how this compared with last year, and just a suggestion. It might be helpful to see last year's numbers on future reports, just so that we can kind of compare one year to the next how we're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Councillor Day. Through Your Worship to Councillor Day, I'm just actually looking, there's a note in the financial statements, which is the next item on the agenda, and the note has the previous year's information as well. So I'm just looking to find that for you.
Ms. Hempting has her hand up. Ms. Hempting.
Just to add note 10 on the financial statements, you'll be able to see a comparative there.
And okay, I'll leave my questions to the next item then.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. So as I said, this was just for information purposes. So I'm going to move on to the next item, which will be 7.3. And this is our 2020 draft consolidated financial statements. And I will hand it back to staff.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have a short presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen here. It'll just take a few seconds. Okay. So your screen should have the copy of the PowerPoint. Please let me know if you can't see it.
It does.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
no, we're good.
Good. Okay, so the 2020 draft consolidated financial statements are presented and include 100% of the city's operations and capital, as well as our proportionate share of West Shore Parks and Recreation Society's assets, liabilities, and everything that comprises of their financial statements. And our percentage this year is 21.34%. So the intention of this presentation is to provide a brief overview of 2020 operations compared to budget, and then how our financial position has changed as a result of the operations. Oops, skipped one. So this first slide explains the change in the city's financial position as a result of 2020 operations. And for those of you who want to follow along, the detailed amounts are included on the statement of financial position on page 98 of the agenda package, which is page 1 of the financial statements document. So the city's net financial asset position has improved by over $6 million over 2019 as a result of the changes in financial assets and financial liabilities. So some of the highlights in the changes in financial assets You can see that they've increased by $10.7 million. The majority of that increase is due to an increase of $9.9 million in cash and investments. And that is loosely based on a $9.2 million surplus that we realized this year, combined with nearly a $5 million change in operations, so cash from operations. And the largest part of that was, you'll see later down, that we had an increase of nearly $4.5 million in payables and accrued liabilities. So we take those two amounts and then we reduce them by $3.7 million that was used in the acquisition of capital assets, and as well as $650,000 that was used to pay down debt. So that's how we get to our change of $9.9 million in cash for the year. And then the other change in the financial assets was approximately $800,000 in receivables. That was partly due to increases in both property taxes and general receivables. And included in that amount is actually almost $220,000 in homeowner grants that were due from the province at the end of last fiscal year, or at the end of 2020. So moving on to the financial liabilities, they have increased just over $4.4 million. As I alluded to before, accounts payable and accrued liabilities increased $4.4 million.
Sorry to interrupt. Your slides aren't moving, and I'm not sure if you intended for them to move.
Oh, no. Sorry, I'm just on this total financial liabilities.
Okay.
Line item now. I'm just going to talk about the difference in this $4.4 million. So the accounts payable and accrued liabilities did increase the 4.4, and the large portion of that was actually an increase of $3.6 million in amounts due to the province at the end of the year for school taxes. And so that was as a result of the province allowing us to defer that payment. Normally we pay that amount monthly from the time taxes are due until the end of the year. And in this case, they chose to allow us to defer it until 2021. So we took them up on that offer. And then we also had a small increase in trade accounts payable that increased, or went to help fulfill that $4.4 million increase. So part of the 4.4 was also a decrease in deferred revenue of $725,000. And there's a variety. One of the noteworthy amounts in there was an increase of $880,000 in development cost charge revenue, an increase of $145,000 in building permit revenue. There was an increase in $400,000 of West Shore Parks and Rec deferred revenue. And then there was a decrease in deferred conditional grants of $755,000. And that's because those were deferred at the end of 2019, but recognized as revenue in 2020. As you'll note, if you're following along in the financial statements, debt decreased by $838,000 as a result of paying down the debt, or the payments that we make every 6 months. As well, employer future liabilities increased by $163,000, and that was due to a new actuarial evaluation that was performed. And then tangible capital assets have increased a net of nearly $3 million, and that amount is as a result of total acquisitions of approximately $6.1 million, less amortization of $3 million, and a small net impact decrease in the ownership of the West Shore Parks and Rec Society assets. So now I'll move on to the next slide. So this slide shows the change in operations and how they compare to budget for 2020. And this detailed, or the detailed amounts, are included in the statement of operations on page 99 of the council agenda package, or page 2 of the financial statements document. So as you can see, revenue is very close to the budgeted line. So the budgeted line, or budgeted amount, is shown in blue, and the actual for 2020 is shown in red. and the 2019 actual is shown in green. So I'm comparing the results of the actuals to budget in this case. So 2020 revenues are only $67,000 over budget. So we collected 67,000 more than we budgeted for, which is only a 0.2% variance. So some of the highlights, and one thing I want to point out is that you will notice on the statement of operations, if you're looking at it, that the other investment income line has a loss. So it's showing a negative. And this is due to the reversal of a receivable we had booked over many years related to some debt that we carry and an asset that can potentially evolve out of that. And it's called a debt reserve fund. So this year, MNP asked us to reverse that because it's technically a contingent asset and we shouldn't be booking it until or if or when we actually receive those funds. So still on investment income, we did collect or earn more than $200,000 more than what was in the budget. And we transferred over $450,000 to reserves and deferred revenue of that interest. A couple other items of note are conditional grant or conditional government transfers were about $700,000 over budget, and developer contributions were nearly 1.1 million under budget. And on that, there's a combination of items that resulted in us being under budget. So some of it was we were actually higher than budget for contributions to the amenities and affordable housing reserve. So we received money and then transferred to reserve for those two. And that was about 300,000. But we were under budget in a couple other areas for developer contributions and DCC funding. And it just was a result of the the capital projects being funded differently than they were originally planned to. So on the expenses side, expenses are 1.25 million under budget. And some highlights, and it's general because it was pretty much the same in every section of the organization. So overall salaries and benefits are under budget by approximately 110K, and that's after we had to increase the salaries expense for that actuarial adjustment I talked about earlier. Special initiatives were $760,000 under budget, and that's as a result of reprioritization or the fact that the projects are still in progress. And then another item that was across the board was training and travel was about $140,000 under budget for the year, and that was as a direct result of COVID. So the last slide I have for you, sorry, just getting here, is just, it shows the breakdown of the accumulated surplus at the end of the year, and you can see the 2020 and the 2019 amounts are there. So we have, sorry, that in the largest portion of the accumulated surplus is that amount at the top that you see that's invested in tangible capital assets. So that amount of $142.5 million is made up by taking the amount that's on our statement of financial position, so 151.3 million, and then we take away the amount of the outstanding debt. So at the end of 2020, we had approximately 8.7 million in outstanding debt. So that total the 142.6 million that you see on the slide there. We also have nearly 16.6 million set aside in reserves that are for a specific purpose, and they're either by bylaw or council resolution. And those reserves increased nearly 2 million in 2020. And that was as a result of 3.9 million being transferred into the reserves and 1.9 million transferred out. So, and for comparative purposes, we were budgeted to transfer 2.6 million in and 3.2 out. So we exceeded the transfers too, and we were lower on the transfers out. So the next number there you'll see, and this is something new that we have as part of the accumulated surplus. So internally restricted for specific purpose, that 8.57 million is comprised of approximately 3 million leftover funds that were unspent at the end of the year from the COVID-19 restart grant. So we received 3.476 million. We spent approximately 462,000. And so the rest is sitting in that internally restricted for specific purpose line item. And the other bulk of that is gas tax. So there's 5.6 million in gas tax at the end of 2020. And that used to be held as deferred revenue on the statement of financial position. So this just better reflects the financial stance of the city. And so that's why it's now sitting in accumulated surplus. So the operating surplus is comprised of general fund operating surplus of 6.24 million and sewer operating surplus of 443,000. And then the last amount you see there is just the portion of the West Shore Parks and Rec Society. So it's a non-cash portion of the accumulated surplus, similar to the capital assets, which is also non-cash. So that's it, high level summary. Hopefully I didn't lose too many of you by throwing out too many numbers. And we also have Corey from MMP is going to do a presentation when I'm done as well. So I'm happy to take any questions you have. I will stop sharing my screen so that you don't have to look at the slide anymore.
Sorry, I was muted. We'll look for questions. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a quick question, Marley. Are we allowed to use the operating surpluses to offset taxation increases?
That's a good question. I haven't been in Colwood long enough to know whether or not that's a practice that Colwood has used. I've worked in other local governments that have wanted to, as a manager of finance or a director of finance in the past. I have recommended not using operating surplus, as it is because it will negatively impact your tax lift in the future in the following year or years, because unless you continue to draw from that funding, you'll have to make up for it. So let's say you took $500,000 in 1 year, or in this year, let's say, then where are you going to generate that $500,000 next year, right? So it's just not sustainable. That's why typically we recommend against it. But I'm happy if Ms. Hepting has something else to add to that. She certainly can add more.
I was thinking more along the lines of one-off costs, that the ones that are not continuously operating or maintenance costs in the future. That's where my head space was.
Yeah, those are, we actually, sorry, through your worship to Councillor Kobayashi, we actually have special initiatives, which are those one-time costs, and those are not funded through taxation. Those are funded typically from the reserve. So, and I see Jen has her hand up, so I'll let her chime in.
Thank you, Marley. Just to complement what Marley just mentioned, in recent years, the only example I can think of where we did utilize surplus, and specifically it was a reserve surplus for purposes of mitigating a property tax increase, was in 2020 to help fund the increased taxation required for the increased policing costs. And as Marley mentioned, throughout the budget process, our financial plan, we do for any one-time costs, so costs that are not expected to repeat, initiatives, master planning projects, we do propose one-time funding sources for those. So whether it be out of surplus or out of city reserve fund. And so that has been factored in into previous budgets into the most recently approved financial plan.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands. So we do have a motion that staff have recommended, which is that the council approve the 2020 consolidated financial statement, and that the chief administrative officer, the chief financial officer, and the manager of finance be authorized to sign the 2020 consolidated financial statements. That will be moved by Councillor Kobayashi. May I have a seconder? Councillor Logan has seconded that. I will come back for discussion. Councillor Kobayashi, do you wish to discuss? No, okay. I'm not seeing any other hands. So I'm just pausing for a moment to skip people. I'm not seeing hands, so I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. So we will move on to 7.4. Staff, does somebody want to introduce Corey for us?
Thank you, Mayor Martin. So we have Corey, partner with MNP, here with us tonight, and Corey will be providing an overview of the 2020 audit findings report. I'll turn it over to Corey now, and staff are happy to answer any questions as they arise, or we can save them for the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great, and thank you. And just before Corey begins, I don't see a motion. So is this just for information purposes, or is there a motion that I would need after this presentation is done?
Thank you, Mayor Martin. I don't believe there is a council resolution required. The purposes of this presentation is for information purposes only.
Great, thank you. I will hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Martin and councilors. Thank you for having me here today. Hope everybody can hear me okay. I do have a presentation. See if I can, there we go. Let's get some screen sharing going here. So you should be able to see a lovely coffee cup there. Thank you to staff for the presentation on the financial statements. I'm just going to talk about the audit process. As exciting as that sounds, I promise to keep my comments brief. I think it's going to come up on a slide, but I want to start by thanking staff for all their work on the audit this year. In the pandemic, of course, we are limiting our on-site visits to keep your staff safe and our staff safe. So doing most of the audit remotely poses challenges, and staff was very patient with the process this year. So thank you very much to staff. So I'm going to talk about the audit findings report, any key findings, and wrap up with a little bit of financial analysis. So we are finished the audit for another year, a clean audit opinion. So we are satisfied that the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects, in accordance with the appropriate public sector accounting standards. So the financial statements are your financial statements prepared by staff representing your results. Our auditor responsibility is to look at the controls in place, to ensure that you're getting accurate financial reporting, make sure assets are being safeguarded, the risks of fraud and theft are minimized. We sample transactions throughout the year to form our audit opinion. We don't look at every transaction. And to do that sampling and to do our audit work, we determine a materiality number, which drives our amount of testing. As generally around 4% of your annual revenues is how we calculate that number. And if there's unusual items in any year, it might not be exactly 4%. We might be taking those out to try and get to a more normal look at the year. So the $1 million is the materiality for this year. We looked at every transaction larger than that, and we sampled underneath. We didn't find any irregularities or anything that we would need to bring to council's attention. We are not specifically fraud investigators when we're doing a financial statement audit, but if something came up in the course of our audit, I would be required to report that to council to make sure that you're aware of it. There are no changes from the audit service plan that was presented to you several months back. I would say no significant unadjusted differences. So no items where management and MMB disagree on approach or what the number should be. Again, an unmodified audit opinion. That's auditor speak for a clean audit opinion for fiscal 2020. Again, thank you to staff, not just in finance. We do talk to managers and directors in other departments, but of course, spending most of our time with finance. We confirm that MMP is independent with respect to the City of Colwood from January 1st, 2020 through to today, May 10th, 2021. We didn't do any other projects or any other work that would impair our ability to give you an independent audit opinion. And I will wrap up with a little bit of financial analysis, just a quick highlight and a note here. Marley's presentation going through fiscal 2020 and what happened in that year. We like to take a step back and look at a broader scope, the last 4 to 5 years, what's happening in the accounts, look at some ratios and trends. And I think I just have the one for you tonight to highlight is the sustainability ratio. So this is comparing your financial assets or your liquid assets, cash and investments and receivables, to your financial liabilities, what you're going to pay out. So it's very, very close to a liquidity ratio. The key number we're looking for here is the number 1. If this ratio is over 1, it means you have reserves and funds put aside to pay for future projects. If you are dipping below 1, it means that you are having to raise taxes, user fees, or some other type of funding or financing in the future to pay for the past. So this actually shouldn't have a percentage sign beside it, but this ratio for the city has been improving from 1.0 flat in 2016 to 1.6 now in 2020. So I just want to make a comment and kudos to council and staff for paying attention to this planning into your budgets and into the direction that the city is going, to make sure that you have those funds available for future projects and you're finding that balance in all things. So 1.6 is or trending to 1.6 is a healthy indicator. And that's all for my presentation. So I will also stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any question about the audit of the audit process.
Excellent, thank you. I have to say, I've been on council, I think it's 10 years now, and I actually recall, I think, Corey, the first year that you presented to us, and I'm not sure what year that would have been, 13 or 14, and we were actually at a 0.76 on the sustainability ratio, and we were working to try and get to 1. And I realized that was a lot of work of past councils trying to get to that effort to even get us to 1. And so when I see 1.6 now, I'm just so excited with the fact that our financial health has basically flipped from a decade ago. And I think that speaks to the work that a lot of councils, the past councils and this council has done. So that's a very exciting number for me. I'm going to go to discussion point. First will be Councillor Baxter, then Kobayashi, then Parkinson. Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter, you're muted.
Yeah, it works better if I'm not, eh? So just a question on that ratio. Since MNP does all kinds of audits elsewhere, I just wonder what a normal sort of ratio or a recommended ratio would be.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure there's a right answer for the second half, the recommended. Every community is a little bit different with terms of what's coming down. But generally the healthier number that we see is that between 1 and 2. Realistically, if you're climbing into the 2, 3, 4 on that range and having 4 times as much assets as liabilities, it means you have a lot of money put aside. That's a tough balancing act as well, and that's tough to explain why there's a lot. So most of the communities that I see that are balancing large capital projects, just like the city and things coming down the pipeline, are managing to be somewhere between 1 and 2. So 1.6, as Mayor Martin mentioned earlier, is a fantastic number to have gone to, because yes, the comment earlier was correct. You were at a net debt position as shortly as 6 or 7 years ago. So this has been a tremendous improvement.
Wonderful. And congratulations to staff for helping us get there.
Absolutely. Councillor Kobayashi's next. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a quick question, Corey. Is that materiality of 1 million, do you keep it random to surprise us all the time, or is that the number you always use so that we can get ready for you? Just a question.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. No, not random. Generally, what we do is we are calculating that ratio is somewhere between 2 and 4% of your annual revenues. If your revenues swing seemingly from year to year, it might change. Now, baked into that is that we are also calculating what we call a performance materiality, a lower number. and testing a little bit more to give ourselves a little bit of comfort around the wiggle room. The randomness comes from the risk assessment that we place on each of the accounts that Ms. Boven went through. Is we will focus on the areas such as revenue and deferred revenue with a bit more scrutiny, pick random amounts there. And then if there are areas that we don't feel have a lot of risk of misstatement, we tend to focus less on those. So the random comes out of that risk-based approach as opposed to the materiality number.
Okay, thanks a lot, Corey. Great answer.
Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. You know, the first thing I want to do is thank you. You taught me a new phrase today in your letter, professional skepticism. And I went, man, do I ever like that phrase? And is that ever an important quality to have? And not only accounting, but everybody. And I thought, I never used the phrase. I never heard it before, but man, I'm going to be using it in the future because I do, you know, I mean, it's what gets you to where you can express an audit opinion. So that's good. My question, and this may not be to you, Corey, but can somebody go through for me the difference between the annual report and what we're looking at here? I see the annual report comes later, and what's the difference?
Yeah, and I'll start and maybe then defer to staff. Is your annual report would include these financial statements that Ms. Boven went through, and then have more information. I think the SOFI reporting that was asked about earlier, as well as any material that city staff and council wanted to add to tell the story of the year. So that's where I see the report. But if Ms. Hepting or anyone else wants to jump in, I'd be happy to hear their thoughts.
Ms. Hepting.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Happy to complement what Corey just mentioned. So the annual report, it absolutely is a snapshot of the year for the city. We will include the financial statements, we'll include statement of financial information or reference you to that document, but we'll also include statistical information on the city. We'll include commentary on milestones that were made, achievements made in specific service areas. So it really is the financial statements are a small portion of the annual report. But in short, the annual report looks back, our financial plan looks forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you. Appreciate that. Good job.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of get a sense like the materiality has certainly changed over the years. I remember when you first started, I think materiality was about $300,000. And so now we are up to $1 million, which is good. But your audit report is sort of like a crystal ball. And I'm trying to figure out how far out it accurately predicts things for COVID. So things are looking good now, but there is always potential for things to go a little sideways. We're feeling a lot of development pressure. We know that there's upgrades are going to be required to different systems. How long do you anticipate that your predictions are good for? Are they good till this time next year or longer than that?
Thank you, Councillor. A good question. Really, the function of the financial statement audit and looking is the look back. As Ms. Hepting mentioned, your budget is the look forward. So the financial statements and the trend analysis that was a look back at the last few years, that's the history, and history can turn on a dime. I think we all know in the last year or so that we've spent, things can change very quickly. So I would say the biggest pieces of the look forward are your budget, your 5-year financial plan, and your asset management plan. I think you mentioned the infrastructure and future costs and things coming online, and with the development going on in the community, that is definitely top of mind. That there will be future infrastructure costs. It might not be 5 years from now, it might be 20 years from now. So that asset management plan is hugely important. Having a sense of when those costs are going to hit so that you can plan into them. Mayor Martin mentioned that, turning around from the last 6 or 7 years, but being able to plan into the next 6 to 7 to 20 to 30 is important so that you can leave the city in good shape for your successors. I think that's so I would, as much as the financial plan is important, I would place more emphasis on that asset management plan.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Doesn't look like I have any other hands, so I'm going to try and say your last name, Corey. Thank you, Mr. Vander Holt. Did I get it right?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, I don't need a motion for that, so we are now going to move to bylaws. 8.1 we have pushed to the end. So this takes us to 8.2, bylaw number 1700-04, official community plan amendment, Royal Beach sub-area plan. This is for adoption. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor Jansen. Discussion? Councillor Day.
Thank you. So it's not a surprise to anyone that I have some concerns with Royal Bay Beach. And I did provide a couple of months ago questions related to those concerns because of the experiences of some other municipalities in BC and the court action that they are currently facing now. I just want to point out for council that the development in Seashelt, which has seen 8 to 10 homeowners in the Supreme Court of BC suing the municipality for the sinkholes that have made their homes unlivable, are still waiting for that process to conclude. That is a 2006 development, which is now, almost 15 years later, causing great turmoil. And I still do not know who in the city would be responsible to answer for any of that. It would appear that we are using the exact same engineering consultant firm that Seashelt used. West Vancouver has also had numerous legal issues. And I just really, I think that the people of Colwood deserve to know if that is something that they are protected from by the city, or is every person going to have to pursue whatever happens in the courts.
Okay, thank you. Is that a question, Councillor Day? Were you looking for a staff answer?
Yes.
Okay, I will go to staff.
Thank you very much, Mayor Martin, and through to Councillor Day. The development agreement includes provisions for geotechnical monitoring prior to each subdivision of works, and then prior to the subdivision again of works, and prior to the realization of a building permit, as well as the building permit also has specificity about geotechnical review, about the bearing strength and capacity. So there is multiple times in the future when we will be requesting geotechnical input. In regards to who is ultimately responsible if there's something, the city will always be listed on claim, and the entire city is listed on all claims, including ICBC accidents right through to anything else. So the council felt enough to proceed with the development agreement registration that it was adequately covered at that time. And as such, that agreement is now registered with those provisions as previously viewed by council. And we are proceeding to request for consideration for adoption. Thank you.
Councillor Day?
Thank
Do you have a follow-up or anything?
Nope.
Okay. Councillor Jansen?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. This is the first time hearing about sinkholes. Am I missing something in the report here somewhere? Is there a section on sinkholes or something?
Through Your Worship, there is no mention of sinkholes in any report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.3, this is bylaw number 1837, land use bylaw amendment number 175, comprehensive development CD30, Royal Beach. This is for adoption. May I get a mover and seconder, please? It is moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.4, this is bylaw number 1861, excuse me, land use bylaw amendment number 181, CD 28, zone amendment. This is for adoption. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Parkinson, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I thought I had my hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to make the comment that anyone reading the agenda would be hard pressed to understand what is impacted by this bylaw, because all it says is CD 28 zone amendment. And I would like to respectfully suggest that we should have a descriptor so that any layman reading our agenda knows what we're talking about.
Okay, I think that's a fair request. I'm sure staff can ensure that that happens in the future unless there's an issue with that. I'm looking for staff to put up their hand if there's a concern with that. Doesn't look like it, so thank you for that, Councillor Day, and we will aspire to do that in the future. So we are still on 8.4. So I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.5, this is bylaw number 1881. This is the sewer utility amendment number 8. This is for first, second, and third reading, and then I will have a second for adoption. So this is just for first, second, and third. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Mayor Martin, just to move us along. Discussion? So, Councillor Day, then Parkinson.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering, for the sewer utility, there are a number of amendments that are being made to land uses in South Colwood. And there was a report several months ago that identified some concerns with the capacity in those sewer lines. Is that being addressed?
Through your worship to Day. Thank you very much. Yes, what happens is the sewer capacity and flows are monitored through the lift station, and the city plans for upgrades. We are seeing a remarkable uptake on sewer connections recently. We have more to come.
Thank you. And how will the upgrades be handled? Will there be a report coming forward on that?
Through your worship to Councillor Day, the enhancement strategy of the city is a development cost charge consideration, in which case the council does have to pass a bylaw expenditure for any DCC funds. So it will come forward to expend or authorize the expenditure. I'm hoping at least a year before the expenditure is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson.
Just wondering what these rates were before they're being changed.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. So the rate change that's before you tonight, previously our minimum sewer utility fee levy was $80, and this bylaw is proposing that that increase to $150. And the rate per annualized cubic meter has really simply been rounded up to the nearest 5 cent. So next to no change on the rate per cubic meter, but we have increased the minimum utility fee per property that's connected to sewer. So staff ran a number of scenarios, and this is how we can achieve the necessary revenue increase. We are benefiting from an increase in properties on sewer, primarily through the the increased growth and development of the city. And so overall, existing properties won't realize a substantial increase, if any, on their utility levy, but those properties with minimal water usage, they will see that minimum fee increase under this proposed bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Great. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I will call the question. This is for first, second, and third reading. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. I will now move to adoption of the same sewer bylaw. May I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. That will take us to our new 8.6, which is 8.1, which is bylaw number 1873, the tax rate bylaw for 2021. Ms. Hempting.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Do you see the slide deck before you?
We do.
Excellent. So tonight we brought forth the tax rate bylaw. Just bear with me. I'm just going to adjust my screens. Do you still see that slide deck before you?
Yes. Yeah, we do.
So with an introduction to this bylaw, I'll take a moment to just provide a little bit of background information so we can understand the implications of this property tax bylaw versus any alternate or any changes that council wishes to direct of staff. So at the April 12th meeting of council, there was a number of resolutions made and directions provided with respect to the 2021 to 25 financial plan. That financial plan was adopted on April 26th. This slide before you highlights the property tax increase, so the property tax revenue increase that is proposed and ultimately was approved under adoption of that financial plan. So to talk about 2021 budget in particular, our city budget requires that we levy $16.5 million in property taxation. That's the funding that's required for the service delivery that council approved by way of adoption of this financial plan. At the time this was introduced, we estimated that our new tax base, which, as you know, we use for specific purposes under city policy, we estimated that that new construction tax was $384,000. As a result, our property tax revenue needed to increase 6.5%. At this meeting.
Sorry, Jen, just to interrupt. And again, I apologize because I did this. Did you mean to change slides? Because the slides aren't changing on our end.
I did mean to change slides.
So right now we're still seeing 2021 draft tax rate bylaw.
Are you seeing 2021 tax rate bylaw presented by Jen Hepting right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Now are you seeing 2021 budget?
No, it's just stalled on that one.
Okay. Oh, my screen sharing is paused.
Now it's changed.
Okay. I apologize for that. That was me changing screens on my end. This was the slide I was just speaking to for the last 60 seconds or so. So with that financial plan adoption, we were looking at a property tax revenue increase of 6.5%. At the April 26th meeting, council adopted that financial plan and provided staff with direction that we maintain a business or a class 6 ratio of 3.93 for each of 2021 and 2022. This direction requires that we ensure that the rate of property tax paid by our business property tax class is no more than 3.93 times the rate of tax paid by our residential property tax. Ultimately, the draft bylaw before you tonight reflects this direction specifically. And how that bylaw and ultimately these draft tax rates that are before you impact our ratepayers is to be considered. So throughout budget deliberations, we focus on the property taxation required to resource and fund the rates of service delivery that are either requested or endorsed of council. In addition, we provided some context by way of the estimated dollar impact on a typical residential property. So we made references if a property tax revenue increase of 7% is endorsed, the estimated impact on a typical residential property will be $155. And so throughout deliberations, we provided some of that context. I wanted to take a moment and revisit because there's many ways in which we can provide this context, but two in particular that are often used interchangeably is that of the typical property and that of an average property. So the slide before you shows the typical residential property assessment for each of the municipalities within the CRD. This is data from the BC Assessment Authority, and these values are calculated, one based on single family homes. So for example, we exclude strata properties, and these values are based on our entire assessment roll. And it's the median assessed value. And so basically, if we took a listing of all residential single family properties in Colwood, and we looked right at that middle property in that list, in 2021, that property would have a value of $685,000. If we ran the same list in 2020, and we picked that middle property, it would have an assessed value of $631,000. Conversely, another piece of context that could be provided is that of the average or the mean residential property assessment. And so in Colwood, the average residential property is assessed, slightly higher at close to $700,000, which is a 6.5% increase over that same average property last year. So the typical residential property that was published in the media earlier this year, that includes all properties on the assessment roll, regardless of whether or not they are newly constructed. This average assessed information that you see on the slide before you, this is looking at like for like. So I'm a property owner, my property existed last year. This is my assessed value this year. So this average excludes any of the newly constructed properties. Why do I highlight this? If we didn't receive direction to maintain a business tax rate, we would bring forth a bylaw that would show that property tax revenue increase equally applied to each property class. So 6.5% increase to the taxes collected from our residential class, a 6.5% increase to the taxes collected from our business class, etc. That in turn, depending on the market change of our assessment roll, would result in slight fluctuations to our tax rate ratio. So the draft bylaw before you tonight has been prepared to ensure that we levy that $16.5 million that is required to fund service delivery, and it reflects ensuring that our Class 6 business ratio is maintained at 3.93. So what is the impact of that? Well, an average property, so that's a property that if I had a property last year and that same property exists this year, that property is going to realize an increase in the taxes they pay of just shy $139 or 7.3% increase over the municipal taxes that same property paid last year. The typical property, which includes the impact of new construction, that property is going to pay $170 more than what the typical property paid last year. And as a result of maintaining that ratio of 3.93, our business taxpayer is going to pay $77 more per $1 million of commercial assessment. And the report that was provided and published provided two sample business properties or commercial properties, a restaurant and a gas station, just to see how for those two sample properties, this tax rate actualized. And I'll just take pause if there's any questions. Otherwise,
yeah, I'm not seeing any hands, Jen.
So the next slide shows if we didn't shift any property tax burden between classes, meaning we didn't attempt to fix the business ratio at 3.93, and rather we allowed that property tax revenue increase to hit each property tax class in its entirety the same. And so the residential impact is an increase of $120 or 6.3%. And the reason you're seeing 6.3 and not 6.5 is because based on these exact rates and our final assessment roll, our new construction revenue actualized slightly higher. So rather than requiring a 6.5% increase, the increase we require has actualized closer to 6.3. A typical property with these exact same tax rates would be paying $153 higher than what a typical property paid in 2020. And if we don't attempt to maintain that 3.93 multiplier, our business ratio is going to increase from 3.93 to 4.11. As a result, these class 6 business properties are going to pay almost $500 more in municipal taxation per $1 million of assessed value. And then the last scenario that I've put forth just to provide further added context is if we look to shift burden to increase the business taxes and to increase that multiplier to 4.17. When staff provided a little bit of background to the introduction of the 2021 to 2025 financial plan bylaw, we provided a bit of a discussion on the business tax rates. City policy currently directs that we look at a 5-year phased program to reduce our business tax ratio from 4.51, which is what the ratio was in 2019, to 3.67, plus or minus 10%. But those are the two ratios that have been highlighted, and we're looking at reducing our ratio over a 5-year term. In 2020, we reduced the business ratio to 3.93. If we assumed an equally phased reduction between 2019 and 24, that multiplier should have been 4.34. And if we continue on an equally phased reduction in the ratio, we'd be looking at a multiplier in 2020 of 4.17. And that's what this impact before you shows. So if we did that, you're going to see an increase in your business taxation of $631 or 5.5% per $1 million of business assessed value. Your average residential property is going to see an increase of $115 or 6% over what they paid last year. And the typical property in Colwood, that typical property is going to pay $147 or 8% over what the typical property in Colwood paid last year. So these are some of the factors to consider anytime we receive direction or we attempt to set specific tax rates that impacts the burden that's realized by that property tax class, and ultimately impacts how a property tax revenue increase, as discussed throughout budget deliberations, actualizes to a representative class within a property tax. So for example, single family, and property tax classes themselves, depending on how we ultimately generate that $16.5 million. And so to recap, the bylaw before you has been prepared in order to generate that $16.5 million and to maintain that business tax rate ratio that we had last year in 2020 of 3.93. As we know, we are required to have these bylaws adopted by the end of the week. The tax rate bylaw is before you tonight for both introduction and adoption, which is allowed under an existing ministerial order. And the following 3 slides show what the tax rate Schedule A to the draft bylaw needs to be, depending on whether or not any differing direction is provided to staff. The draft bylaw as published reflects maintaining the business ratio of 3.93. Should council provide different direction, Schedule A would change, and that is before you on the slide deck. And so with that, that was really the only additional background I wanted to provide with the introduction of this bylaw, and pleased to provide any further information or answer any questions that council may have.
Thank you. I see a couple hands up. I'm going to ask one question first, though, Ms. Hempton. Can you explain to me the typical household or the typical residential seems to include new construction, but the average does not, and yet it seems like new construction is driving the percentage up and not down the way I would think it would. Can you explain to council why new construction is driving the percentage up and not down?
Yes, somewhat. Typical property assessment, it takes a look at the entire tax base of the city. So it includes all new folios on the roll. The implication of this is because our folio count is increasing and the values of those new folios, that is skewing a typical property in Colwood. The assessed value has increased 9%, but the average assessment of existing properties is 6.5% increase. And so if we don't shift anything, that existing property is going to realize that same property tax revenue increase. This typical property is going to realize an increase higher. I don't know if that's answered your question well.
No, I guess what I'm struggling to understand is, let's just say for argument's sake, we have 5,000 residential in our portfolio. And we have new construction, which adds 200. So now I have 5,200 in my portfolio. And I still have the same $16 million that I have to share that over. So why does that number not drive down? Why does that number go up for typical versus average?
In part, this typical assessed value factors in both change. So it's looking at market value change, and it's also looking at an increased assessment base because it's including all of our non-market change properties. Because of the rate of change that's happening in Colwood in our residential class, when we talk about the impact of our property tax increases, it would be more appropriate to be talking about that in relation to our average property. Some municipalities, the typical and the average come in very close to each other. Typical is looking at the median. So statistically, it's that middle point property versus average, which is when we look at last year's assessment base, 6,000 folios. I'm going to look at those same 6,000 folios and just consider the market assessment change on those.
Okay.
Why did we refer to typical properties? In part, that property and that assessed value is highlighted annually with the release of each assessment roll. The typical value is commented on. The implication for us to consider is that if that typical property has an increase that exceeds the average assessment increase, it's going to skew the impact of tax rates. So if we consider an existing property taxpayer, that existing property taxpayer is going to realize an increase under the draft bylaw as was published before you of approximately $139 or 7.28%.
I'm going to go to hands. Councillor Baxter is first. Councillor Baxter.
I think it was me at the last meeting that proposed that we or moved that we stick with the business class multiplier of 3.93. And I thank staff for explaining to me, not only in great detail, but so that I think I actually understand it, what the impact of the business class multiplier is. And I am therefore going to propose that we change those instructions and go back to the equal steps every year for 5 years, which I think gives us a multiplier of 4.17, if I've understood that correctly.
Do you see the slide before you that proposes we increase the business ratio to 4.17?
Yeah. So that's what I'm proposing we use for the tax bylaw.
Okay, so Councillor Baxter, what I will do is I will come back to you just because
Okay.
I do have other hands looking for discussion. So you will be the first to make a motion when I get to motions.
Thank you.
So unless you have any other questions, Councillor Baxter.
Nope, that's good. That's good.
Okay, then I will go to Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jen, just to be clear, when you give us numbers like you have here, the 8% and 6%, 5.52%, those numbers relate to gross municipal taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So just some long-winded how I got here to where I'm at today is we had, as a council in the fall, a long discussion of the different services we thought the community wanted and would benefit from. And we came up with a shopping list of things that we felt were desired and necessary for our community. we went in the spring, we went through that again with some costing information, and we got to a number. We were all talking about a number of 6.5%. I think there was, maybe it was going to be 7, maybe it's going to be a little less. 6.5%. And to be perfectly honest, I thought the 6.5% related to the scenario that you presented, that one that where everybody went up 6.5%. I didn't realize the impact of the multiplier on the businesses. So that's kind of what I believed we were talking about, and maybe what everybody believed we were talking about. I'll let everybody else speak for themselves. So that's why, like Michael, I think we have to look at that 3.93 multiplier. I think we have to recognize that basically the businesses last year got a smoking good deal when we dropped it a lot more than we originally intended to do. Good for them, probably a good year to do that to them, but we have to recognize that any tax we don't take from the businesses, we take from the residences. So, and I think perhaps this year we have to be a little gentler on the residences, if we could say that. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think I've seen stuff from you, Jen, that showed that while either of these 4.11 or 4.17 options would increase the cost to the businesses, if we go back 2 years, in fact, we might see that the change to the businesses is less, or perhaps even still negative from what they're paying 2 years ago. So we've given the businesses the benefit of the doubt by giving them a great deduction last year. We tried not to raise taxes at all last year. I guess we maybe didn't hit that nail on the head, but I think we came close. So I'm not fussed about whether we go with a 4.11 or 4.17 ratio. I think we should adjust it. Apologies to the businesses. It will make it better. And I think the other thing that when I was looking at these numbers and these percentages, I mean, I always knew that they only accounted for half of the tax bill, and that the other half of the tax bill was going to be less. And that's why, so when we're talking 6.3% on this side, 8.3%, but the overall impact of the gross taxes is going to be, what, in the 4% range? Do you have those numbers, what that would be, Jen?
Yes. For residential properties, shall we start there?
Sure.
So overall, if we look to increase the business multiplier to 4.17, that equally phased starting from 2019, the gross increase on an average residential property is just shy of 4%, or $137. Of that $137, the majority, or $115, is for municipal taxation, and $23 is for capital, regional, and hospital district taxation. So overall, this year, with the way the requisitions fell from the other jurisdictions, the overall increase is 3.9% on an average residential property if we increase the business multiplier to 4.17.
And other years it'll be different. There'll be other years where they may have big things. I mean, I think perhaps all of this council will be more wary going forward as we do look at increases. But I would be perfectly comfortable with the 4.11 or the 4.17 ratio. I think it makes a lot more sense than basically taking all the increase on the residential taxpayer. So I'll shut up. I'll support Michael's motion if it stands when we get through what everybody else has to say. Thank you, and thanks very much for your work on this, Jen.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Jen, okay, so let's make sure we're comparing apples and apples here, okay? Now we're using average instead of typical, right? So if we want to make sure that we're looking at apples to apples, now if we go to the 4.17 and we apply this, what is the total gross taxes? It's got to be more than 4%.
For the average residential property on the property class in its entirety?
No, I'm talking, let's keep it apples to apples. So I can look at this and sort of say, what's the impact of doing this because what we've got sitting in front of us right now is about a 6% overall property tax increase, gross, right? Gross, total gross taxes using typical. Now we're switching the language to average, which changes what we're looking at right now.
So overall, you've got a property tax revenue increase that is actualizing at closer to 6.3% because of where our new construction has actualized. And we use that for specific purposes. And that's excluded from this conversation. How that will impact a typical property that has an assessed value of $685,000 versus that typical property last year,
right?
8% or $147.
Okay, so really, if you look at this, we can count our lucky stars in a way. I think we certainly didn't hit the perfect storm, because if you look at the changes right now from 2020, the major change, of course, is our net municipal taxes, right? At about 10.11%. And the rest of it, like $5 and $4 for West Shore Parks and Rec, GVPL, you know, they're less than 5%. And then there's none for school taxes, none, you know, none for transit. And then you've got an increased CRD taxes of $20 and $11 for your CRHD taxes. So really, we can count our lucky stars that we didn't get the typical increases in those other areas. So the big impact right now is still, I mean, I'm sort of trying to localize on the net municipal taxes. And as you know, I have voted against every one of the tax increases every single time at committee. And I still do at this point in time, because I still don't think we're tackling, I mean, the end result here is still too high. And I still think we have to hit some of those, you know, the added services. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to even bring this up or if it's been decided, but I certainly want us to rethink it. And in addition to, I do support what Councillor Baxter has suggested, because that's step one, but I think we have to go further than that. I think we have to look at those added services that we've added. I mean, I just think that during this time, I've made my 12 points that at committee, why I don't think this should go forward at this point in time. But basically, in a nutshell, there's so much uncertainty out there. And, you know, we have to show some empathy here, folks. And that's how I feel about this. I can speak on behalf of this because I'm a fixed income kind of guy. And I just don't think we're taking, you know, the general public's best interest into account here. So I'm just going to make that point. I do think we should have a special meeting just to, you know, let's just confirm to ourselves, do we really want to do this year? And I do know that some of the core services have to be increased to accomplish the development work that we have to get done. But some of the, I sort of looked at what's been approved and some of the new services, and they're not really high safety issues, and they're certainly not going to damage our financial stability here in the city. So I want to make that point, and we'll talk about motions after, but I just, again, want to reemphasize this. Where we're going to make the biggest impact is what we control. And it's exactly what we control. And that's the net municipal taxes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Jansen.
And thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the detailed explanations from the Finance Department, Jen. I have sort of a better grasp on this now. Can I specifically? My question is, what happened with the shift to the business tax rate? Why was it the adjustment so large in this previous year? I would expect a reduction of, you know, 1% or 2% per year over 5 years, a nice round number. But Can you speak to how that ended up being so significantly reduced last year in that particular tax rate?
Certainly, I can provide some comment. When the conversations initially started during budget deliberations in 2020, there was discussion about a phased reduction over a two 5-year period. And so in part, there was no intention on the calculations done at that time to maintain an equally phased multiplier reduction over 5 years. As a result, there was a burden shift of approximately $115,000 in property taxation revenue, and it resulted in a multiplier of 3.93. Other comments I can add, the property tax increase impact realized by a residential ratepayer was closer to 2% because of the 0% revenue increase endorsed under the budget. So in part, that achievement to get that ratio to 3.93 was made with a minimal impact on the residential tax base. And the conversation wasn't a full 5-year, it was 2 to 5 years at that time. And then we had a more in-depth conversation as we introduced and ultimately had policy adopted last fall. And that policy spoke directly to a 5-year timeline. And so it's really important to consider the implications of the decisions and the direction that we make with this tax rate bylaw. If we increase our business multiplier to the 4.17, we are still maintaining that decrease overall when we take that phased approach of going from 4.51 to 3.67. But it's really important to consider the implication next year. If we continue on with that phased approach, we are going to need to decrease our business multiplier. The financial plan that's been adopted does propose a revenue increase. And so while this year, the impact realized by residential ratepayers has been lessened, next year we will have that implication to consider if we do continue on this path over the 5-year period to reduce the multiplier. There may be other tactics that council wishes to consider.
I got you, and I think so. I appreciate that, and I find myself conflicted because I'm not sure how we got to 9%, and obviously people are concerned. But I think by bringing us some options, at least there's some flexibility here, and I think we should consider that. But I'm conflicted because I get we're also stewards of all the assets that belong to this community, and we just heard about our financial statement, that a lot of hard work has been done to bring us into a better position over the years. I wasn't here, but I heard tale about the years when really we had little to no reserves. So I think we should be proud at where we've brought the community in the past decade. But I also get that these are interesting times right now, and that some people are having a tougher time. So it's tough to take a decision that I guess makes everybody happy, and I guess that's my tale of woe for being a politician. But I will await the motion from Councillor Baxter or one of my peers and consider that wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just want to make the suggestion that, nobody was anticipating a pandemic. We started on this road trying to be more business friendly quite some time ago, and towards ensuring that our reserves are in good shape and that we are protecting the things that we need to protect. But I just want to suggest for our consideration that when we're considering the 5-year financial plan next, that we need to consider making our adjustments a little longer term. And I know there's lots of good reasons why we try to stick within our 5-year horizons and so forth. But there may be good reasons in the near future to consider taking more time to get to where we want to be. So I just wanted to plant that seed in our minds as we're considering, how this is going to roll out, looking at our 5-year plan, because every year that we come to making this decision, we're also impacting future decisions. And if we don't get it right, then there will be a bigger tax increase next time, because we can't, we don't have the luxury of just saying, well, we're not going to do that then. We still have to protect our citizens and protect our very important assets. So hopefully we can find a good medium that's both something we can live with and that will maintain the infrastructure that we have in good condition for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to go back to Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter, you wish to make a motion?
Yeah, so I move that the 2021 tax bylaw not be based on a business ratio of 3.93, but on a business ratio of 4.17, and in other respects remains the same as before.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder to that motion? That is seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion? I will discuss then. I don't see any other hands. So I will not be supporting the motion, and I'll tell you why. First of all, the general public believes, because in the report it says 9.3% increase to residents, I do not believe that our residents are now going to start looking at single family impact of $115 at 6%. I believe that they are going to look that the typical household is going to see an increase of 8%. And I've been quite clear for myself, at least, that I wanted and was working towards a residential lift of 6.5. And we are not going to be accomplishing that on the typical single family home. I also am not supportive of us increasing the ratio to the business community. We had a significant discussion in 2018, 2019, and 2020 about our desire to drive that ratio down. Our ratio at 4.17 in comparison to Langford, for example, is 2.9. In comparison to Sooke is 2.74. In comparison to Sydney, it's 2.85. Part of the whole reason we were attempting to drive down this multiplier was so that we can be competitive with our neighbors and with our colleagues. And I'll use View Royal as well. View Royal has a lower than us as well. And so the whole idea was for us to become competitive. And we had significant discussions about that. So I'm sitting where we clearly need to be spending less. And we need to be driving that percentage down by cuts, not by shifting the burden onto the business community. And that's where I will be landing this evening. I do see hands, so I will go to hands now. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I will be supporting this motion, and my reason for supporting it is quite simple. I don't want to confuse the method of getting there with the goal that we have. We want to support our businesses in Colwood. We want all of our residents to feel that they are supported and that there is a good, responsible financial plan behind it. When we went to the 3.93 multiplier, that was based on very little information. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when we legitimately felt that it was very likely that our businesses were going to be the most impacted by the pandemic. that, you know, everyone is greatly impacted by the pandemic, but it's different than we thought. And there is a good reason for wanting to approach it very gradually and carefully. But also, it's not the only way to support businesses. I think that there are other ways to support businesses, including advertising, including supportive services. The tax bill is not the only way. And the added impact is also that, you know, businesses who may not need any additional support will also be supported by this. And it's not a very targeted approach. We're basically supporting any business, no matter what they do and how valuable that business may or may not be to the citizens of Colwood. I think a better approach would be to support businesses in Colwood that support our residents. So I just think that we need to be a little more targeted in our approach. And I really want to support businesses to locate in Colwood. And I could get behind a lot of potential initiatives to support businesses to locate to Colwood and to be sustainable in Colwood. Over time, I certainly want to hear from businesses. What I've heard from the most is residents who feel fearful that taxes are going to quickly be out of reach. There's nothing I can do to make housing more affordable, but we can do things to make living in Colwood more affordable. And having businesses is one of those things. So I'm supportive of the motion. I'm looking for new ways to support business in Colwood in order to support the whole community. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson, then Kobayashi.
So I am going to support this motion. Am I good to go, Mayor?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I couldn't see you, so I wasn't sure if you were muted or not.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, it took me a bit. I'm going to support this motion, and I do so because to me it's the one that's most consistent with the decisions we've tried to make along the way. I think that when we were talking about reducing the tax ratio, the business tax ratio, to something that reflected the average of the CRD over 5 years, I guess myself and I suspect at least some others on council assumed that would be done in 5 equal steps down. And this going to 4.17 makes it the 2 steps that we would be at if that's the way it had gone forward. Now, for reasons that Jen explained, it took a huge leap down last year, and now now it could stay there, it could move back. But to me, if you had asked me when we pass this thing, what's the ratio going to be in 2 years, I'd have said it's going to be 4.17. So quite easily live with that. The service review and the extra costs that we looked at, and we all sort of, we all disagreed on each and every one, I think, but at the end of the day, council majority passed the ones that added up to what we thought was 6.5%. Now we realize that's not 6.5%, that we have more residential growth and less business assessment growth anyway in our community. So it's something a little bit different, but it's not radically different. So yeah, and I get it. If we want to look at the gross municipal thing number that we thought was 6.5 and now it's 8, that's unfortunate, but we're talking about an overall number that's more in the 4 or 5% numbers. And frankly, when I look at my taxes every year, I look at, geez, what did I pay last year? What am I paying this year? I don't subdivide it and say, well, I hate these guys and I like those guys and they're all kind of neutral. I just kind of look at the number and grumble, and then if it's not too desperate, too outrageous, I pay it. So I think at the end of the day, considering that we tried to absolutely minimize the tax last year on residences, we, in my opinion, over minimized the tax on commercial businesses. But this brings us back into balance. And I certainly agree with the people who are suggesting we take a little more time and approach with a little more understanding this issue next year. But to try to go back through the service review and tweak and adjust and think we're going to make substantial changes over the next 2 days or whatever we have to finalize this bylaw, I don't see that being productive. So it's not a perfect solution, but to me, it's a pretty good one. So I'm going to support this motion. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Your Worship, I just want to make a point here. I am going to support this resolution as one part of the overall solution. But I'll tell you, I think we're going down the same road that we went down before, and we got to learn some lessons here. We're strictly going on a ratio, 4.17 or whatever the number is going to be. And we got to stop thinking in those terms, because here's the bottom line. The overall dollar, I mean, what a business owner, and I can tell you, I own businesses. I had one in Saanich and I had one in Colwood. And the way you look at this is, I didn't really care about what that ratio was. The bottom line is, I wanted to know for my square footage, what was I paying in taxes? It's the bottom line here. So, and I can tell you right now that the business I had in Saanich was on the piece of property I was on was actually assessed at a higher value, even though it had smaller square footage than the business I had in Colwood. So, when you put it all together, like I said, it's a product, your mill rate times your assessment value, it gives you a different result. So I just want to make sure that everyone is very, very cautious when you just try to look at a ratio in isolation. And I can't overemphasize this. You have to be in that position where you've had a business in one place, had a business in another one. And I just talked to the former owner of the Colwood's McDonald's. He owned the McDonald's here, and he owned the 2 or 3 McDonald's in Langford. And his closest one that was about the same size in Colwood, he did pay more, but it wasn't, that substantially more, even though if you look at it from the big point of view or if you look at it from a ratio point of view, that multiplier, it didn't work out, even though they're 2 point something, and we were at that time 4.5 or 4.6. It wasn't double the amount. So just be very, very cautious, and we can't make that same mistake. Just don't look at a ratio just in isolation. This is a stern warning here. So I am going to support this because I think it is step one, but I still think that the increase on single family residential, the impact is just absolutely bizarre at this point in time, and with this where we are with there's so much uncertainty. I mean, I'm not going to support the rest of it, but I will support this. But I would like to make another motion after this myself, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I will call the question. Of those in opposition to the motion that is on screen right now? And the only person who opposes is Mayor Martin. So that motion passes. Councillor Kobayashi, you said you wish to have a second motion?
Yes, I do, Your Worship. I'd like to make a motion, and contrary to my fellow councillor, Councillor Parkinson, I do think this is important, and I don't think we should take this lightly. I think it is worth our time, to have a special meeting. I would like to go back to the table, re-examine not the core, but the non-core, or what we call our added services. I think it deserves another kick at the can, and so I want to make a motion to that effect, that we have another meeting to discuss, bring it back to the table. Obviously, if no one supports it, no one supports it, and it ends tonight. But
so Councillor Councillor Kobayashi, are you looking for that discussion to happen before the May 15th deadline, or are you talking about after the May 15th?
Absolutely before the deadline.
Okay. All right. So I do have the motion. Do I have a seconder? Mayor Martin will second it. Is there any other discussion? Councillor Jansen.
Sorry, that was a late second, I guess, boss.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, at this stage, I just want to clarify something on the previous slide.
Sure.
So we have the typical single-family residential impact, and we have the average single-family residential impact. And I thought, Director Hepting, that from your explanation, the average was a more reasonable one to choose than the typical, because well, I won't bother to try and re-explain it, but that's what I got from what you said. Can you clarify that?
Sorry. Thank you, through Mayor Martin. Yes. And I will add comment, there are many subsets that we can be looking at here. I put this together today to add some additional context to this conversation. And if council wishes, I can provide even further context on specific subsets. The average looks at the existing residential folios in the previous year compared to their market change, that same amount of folios this year. That typical figure that's used, which is based directly off of what BC Assessment publishes, that's looking at the median, not the mean, and it's looking at all taxable folios on an assessment roll. So depending on changes, the impact of a property tax increase can vary depending on what subset we're looking at. And
Okay.
if staff may add, the only comment I just wish to add is, should differing direction be given with respect to our financial plan bylaw, we need to keep in mind that staff need both that direction and direction on property tax rates this week in order to meet statutory deadlines and move on our property tax notice generation and distribution.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on Councillor Kobayashi's motion? Seeing none, does anybody need clarification, or can I just call the vote? Doesn't look like anybody needs clarification, so I will.
Could you clarify? Sorry, Your Worship. Would you mind?
Certainly. So the motion is to come back this week to look at the, Councillor Kobayashi, correct me if I'm wrong, but to look at the expenditures that were decided on by this council for re-examination.
That is correct.
Or something to that effect. Yeah, thank you.
I believe the wording was non-core items.
Yeah, it's the added services.
There you go. Actually, so you know what? Let's do it properly. So I will go to staff. Staff, could you read the motion, please?
Hi, Mr. Mayor. I have that council hold a special meeting of council to discuss added on services for re-examination prior to May 15th.
And within addition that it's, the non-core expenditures.
Oh. Thank you.
Is that clear for everybody? Now, just for clarification, we need. My understanding is we need at least 24 hours notice for a meeting. So we would not be able to have the meeting tomorrow. The meeting would have to be on Wednesday. And then we are looking at that a final decision, and the bylaw needs to be prepared and everything else before the 15th, which I believe is Friday. So we would need to conclude probably for Wednesday, giving an opportunity for staff to do the final work for Thursday. So that would be the end result of this motion. Most likely, is if this motion passed, we would need to meet on Wednesday evening. Staff, correct me if I'm wrong. And nobody's saying anything, so I think I'm right.
You're right.
Sorry,
okay,
may I
thank
jump
you.
in? May I jump
You
in,
may.
Mayor Martin? Sorry, with my screen share. It's important to keep in mind, if council are providing direction to amend the financial plan bylaw, we need to both consider the implications of amending that bylaw and in turn amending the property tax rate bylaw. Depending on the direction received, we may require multiple meetings. So with the 24-hour rule, we would be looking at Wednesday, and I would recommend that we schedule a second meeting because depending on the direction, we need to then pivot to the implications of the tax rate bylaw should council wish to amend the financial plan bylaw.
Okay. I think that, okay, so it basically means Wednesday and Thursday this week. We would need to do that. So any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition to the motion? I have Councillor Day and Parkinson opposed. That motion passes. So that would suggest then that we wouldn't move forward with this evening with the readings of the 3 bylaws. That we would need to look at scheduling a Wednesday meeting. Mr. Earl. Sorry, Ms. Hampton, could you drop the screen, please, so we can see everybody? Thank you. Mr. Earl, what's your recommendation moving forward?
Thank you, Your Worship. So administration will send out meeting requests likely for a Wednesday evening and a potential Thursday evening meeting this week, with the Thursday being the tax rate bylaw and potentially an amendment to the financial plan.
Okay. Thank you. So looking to staff, is there anything else that's needed before I look for a motion to adjourn? Seeing none, then I will look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jansen has made that motion. Those in opposition? Nobody. Oh, Councillor Day, did you wish to comment? Or
Sorry, no, just was trying to
Okay.
put my hand down.
That's all right. So the motion is adjourned, or excuse me, the meeting is adjourned. Oh, actually, sorry. Wait. I got to call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. Motion is adjourned, or meeting's adjourned.